Hello, and welcome to this webinar entitled Hawaii and Okinawa, Militarism, Demilitarism, and Self-Determination. In an effort to contain China, the United States is continuing its military buildup in the Pacific island nations of Hawaii and Okinawa, respectively. The native peoples of these islands have long felt the negative consequences of excessive militarization, including economic hardship, environmental degradation, water poisoning, military accidents, and crime committed by military personnel. Moreover, the looming possibility of war and annihilation continues to threaten the safety of both Hawaiians and Okinawans. While native peoples across the Pacific have consistently shown strong resistance to militarization, their voices have been neglected. This webinar looks to highlight the voices of Native Hawaiians and Okinawans looking to reassert their rights to self-determination, peace, and prosperity. This webinar is sponsored by the Kiwani Foundation and the Peace for Okinawa Coalition. Our speakers today will be Dr. Alfred de Zayas, a retired United Nations official and author of the book, The Human Rights Industry. H.E. Leon Kalahau-Siu, representing Hawaii, and myself representing Okinawa, and I will also be hosting and moderating this event. Thank you so much to both Dr. Zayas and Minister Siu for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to join us today and to share with us your knowledge and expertise. We would also like to thank everyone watching at home or wherever you may be, whether you're watching live or at some point in the future. For those watching, if you do have any questions or comments for us, any of our speakers today, please feel free to leave a comment for us. Even if you're watching in the future, we might be able to respond to you via a comment or possibly even in a future webinar. So please feel free to drop us any questions or comments you might have. We cannot guarantee we can respond to all of them depending on how many we receive and if time allows, but we will try our best to answer your questions. So without further ado, I would like to turn to our first speaker today. His Excellency Leon Kalahau-Siu is from the island of Hawaii and has an unusually diverse background in the arts as an accomplished award-winning musician, recording artist, composer, visual artist, and producer. He is also a speaker and lecturer on Hawaiian history and culture, and an astute political analyst, strategist, and activist. Since the 1970s, he has been involved in what has grown into a movement to liberate the Hawaiian Islands from the 125-year-long illegal occupation by the United States. This led to the 1993 apology by the United States, fully confessing to its wrongful taking of the Hawaiian Islands. Like many others who realized Hawaii is not America and we are not Americans, Mr. Siu affirmed and reclaimed his lawful birthright as a Hawaiian Kingdom subject or a Hawaiian national. Since the year 2000, Leon Kalahau-Siu has served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Keaupuni o Hawaii, the Hawaiian Kingdom. He has been actively engaged in meeting and informing the international community about the United States' illegal occupation of the Hawaiian Islands and inviting other nations to support the return of the Hawaiian Kingdom as a sovereign independent state. His international work in the areas of human rights, self-determination, decolonization, and demilitarization has been recognized with several international awards and honors, including a nomination for the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize. Minister Siu, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Yes, aloha, and mahalo for inviting me to be on this webinar. I really appreciate the platform, and I appreciate both you, Robert Kajiwara, and Dr. Alfred de Zayas. A pleasure to be with both of you. So I'm going to be talking a little bit of background for those of you who don't know really what happened with Hawaii and why we are in the situation we are in now. As Robert mentioned a couple of times, we're under an illegal occupation by the United States. Occupation is sort of the closest term we can come to it. we can come to, because the illegality of the occupation is so unusual and so convoluted that it's really difficult to pin it down as an occupation or as a piracy. It's somewhere in between the two of those. So I'll explain a little bit to you about what happened. In the 19th century, the early part of the 19th century, Hawaii was united as a unified country. The separate islands were brought together under the rule of Kamehameha the Great in 1810. That's when he completed unification of the islands. And then in 1820, there appeared missionaries in Hawaii, and Hawaii actually embraced the word of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and actually became a very, very profound Christian nation. So Christian, in fact, that it avoided the colonial trap that all other native peoples had fallen into. That is, we became a Christian nation before the colonizers could colonize us under the doctrine of discovery. We were a Christian nation. We did not qualify to be discovered or to be colonized by those European nations. So Hawaii went directly from being a native country into being more of a sophisticated under the format of European nations, European Christian nations. So in 1840 or 1839, the king of Hawaii at the time, Kamehameha III, issued a declaration on human rights. And the declaration actually was very similar to the Bill of Rights of the United States, but it used some terminology that was much more native in its tone, but also much more Christian in its tone. By 1840, the Hawaiian Kingdom issued or promulgated a constitution. So the absolute monarchy of the Kamehamehas now became a constitutional monarchy, meaning the king himself was under constitutional rule. And he then became basically the administrative branch of a three-branch government, the king being administration or executive branch, and then the legislative branch. There were two houses in the legislature, and the judiciary, a Supreme Court that interpreted the laws. And then there were, of course, the penal codes and a series of laws passed by the legislators. So Hawaii was a very sophisticated constitutional monarchy. By 1843, Hawaii was recognized by the two most powerful nations on the earth at that time, Great Britain and the Kingdom of France, as a sovereign independent state on equal status as themselves, as the United Kingdom and the Kingdom of France. So Hawaii enjoyed that status with just a select few, probably 30, 35 nations at the time considered sovereign nations. Hawaii was one of those. Hawaii, by the way, was the first non-white nation to be recognized as a sovereign country. So that was in 1843. And from then on, Hawaii started to promulgate treaties with various countries around the world. And by the end of the 19th century, by the 1890s, Hawaii had over 40 treaties with 40 other nations, either bilateral treaties or multilateral treaties. Like as far as we had a treaty with the Universal Postal Union, for instance, which is a multilateral treaty. And also we had 137 diplomatic posts around the world, either consulates or embassies. So Hawaii was very well represented around the world. And we had active trade going on with many, many nations, and with those treaty nations in particular. Hawaii participated in some of the discourse of international discourse at the time, particularly those referring to neutrality. Hawaii declared itself a neutral country in 1854, and also in 1854 declared itself a slave-free country. That is, any slaves that touched Hawaii shores were immediately freed. So many American ships that came to the Hawaiian Islands with slaves on board, servant slaves on board, those slaves were immediately freed when they touched Hawaii. So a number of them remained in Hawaii because they suddenly became free citizens of a free nation. So Hawaii was a very flourishing nation. In the middle of the 19th century, in the 1860s, the United States entered into the Civil War. And there was a war between the North and the South. And Hawaii became quite a prominent player or part of that, not taking sides, but actually being a supplier of goods. For instance, the South, which was the primary, which was where all of the sugar for the United States was coming from the southern states, when they seceded, the sugar, of course, stopped going to the north, and so did many of the farm goods, and so much of it was being shipped from Hawaii. Hawaii became a major sugar exporter to the United States, to the northern states of the United States. And what happened in the 1860s was that the sugar industry exploded. It became so huge because the United States was such a large market for the sugar, and that the sugar planters started to get very wealthy because of that and expanded their operations in the 5 years of the Civil War, 4 or 5 years of the Civil War. And of course, they continued to sell the sugar at very good prices, even after the Civil War, until the Southern sugar started to come back online. So around the 1870s, the Hawaiian Kingdom was in a position of having to negotiate for sugar prices, to try to be a most favored nation status, so that we could sell sugar and other farm goods to the United States. And so that became a very bothersome thing to these sugar planters who became sugar barons. They had large plantations. And during those years, they had seized and had taken up much of the lands, deforested much of our lands, and planted sugar. And so, but they were now very dissatisfied with having to sell competitively on the international market to the United States. So they kept on trying to negotiate for most favored nation status so that they could have higher prices for the sugar. Occasionally, they would fail in getting that, and the sugar prices would drop, and they would be in a great panic because of the big output of investments they had made into the sugar. So they decided that it would be best for Hawaii to be annexed to the United States so that they could have favorable sugar prices all the time and not have to negotiate as foreign country. So they wanted, and in the late 1870s, they cooked up a scheme to annex Hawaii to the United States. And they tried to do this a number of ways. Of course, the various kings along the way, did not find this to be a very pleasant proposal. And so they, of course, opposed any kind of annexation and just shot the idea down. So what happened with the sugar planters? They became insurgents. They decided they would have to overthrow the government and take over the government, and then give the Hawaiian Kingdom to the United States to be annexed to the United States. Now, this was their own plot, but they had to find support in the United States for that plot. And so what they did was they turned to the Department of War, and they said to the Department of War, if you assist us in overthrowing the Hawaiian Kingdom government, we will give you Pearl Harbor as a naval base. Now, the United States had been eyeing Pearl Harbor for a long time. They've been coveting Pearl Harbor because it was deemed to be the best port in the entire Pacific Ocean. And it was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, which would be ideal for the United States plans for expansion to Europe, to Asia. So the United States War Department made a deal with the insurgents in Hawaii, and they said, yes, we would back your revolution, your coup d'etat, and when the time comes. So in 1893, Queen Liliuokalani had just taken the throne a year prior to that. And she was very dissatisfied with the influence of the sugar planters in the government of the Hawaiian Kingdom, because they had basically undermined many of the Hawaiian Kingdom's laws and had taken control of the legislature and were passing laws favorable to the sugar planters and basically stealing Hawaiians' lands in order to plant sugar. And so Liliuokalani decided to issue a new constitution that would restore the monarchy's authority, as well as the votes to Hawaiian people, because many of them had been disenfranchised by the sugar planters and their scheming and their laws that they made. So she's proposed to issue a new constitution, and this was wholly supported by the people of Hawaii. The sugar planters, however, saw this as a real threat, and so they decided it was time to act. So on January 16th, 1893, they spoke to, or they were in collusion with the foreign minister, who was the ambassador from the United States to the Hawaiian Kingdom. And they asked the ambassador if he would order the troops to be landed. There was a troop ship in the harbor at the time, in Honolulu Harbor. And so a company of Marines from that ship were landed on January 16th, 1893. And they marched up Fort Street and then up King Street and bivouacked themselves in front of across the street from the palace with cannons, Gatling guns, and other armaments pointed at the palace. Queen Liliuokalani, who was the queen at the time, was, of course, very perturbed by this and filed a protest to the U.S. Embassy, which was ignored by the ambassador, because he was the one who had landed the troops. The very next day, a group of 13 businessmen, sugar planters and lawyers and businessmen, who were part of a group called the Committee of 13, overthrew, or they announced that they were now the provisional government for the Hawaiian Kingdom. And they basically said, we are taking over the government. And of course, here's the United States Marines pointed their rifles and their cannons at the palace. And the queen basically had no choice. Well, she had a choice. She could have released her troops to fight to repel. And she could have probably very successfully repelled this little invasion. But she also knew that would provoke a war with the United States. And the United States was very warlike. Remember, they were at the tail end of the Indian Wars, where they had slaughtered many Native Americans. And so she was very careful and said, I better not confront the United States militarily. Let's do it diplomatically. So she filed a diplomatic protest, and then she put the government she yielded the government to the hands of the United States, not to the insurgents. And she basically said to the United States that that she would yield the administration of Hawaii to the United States until such time a official investigation was made and the facts become known that this was an illegal act of aggression, and that the United States then restore the government, the proper government, constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And so that was her protest. Meanwhile, the insurgents had dispatched a group of negotiators or representatives to the United States, to Washington, D.C., and they negotiated with the President of the United States at that time, Benjamin Harrison. They negotiated a treaty of annexation. And so the treaty of annexation was signed by both parties, but then it had to be ratified by the Senate of the United States, according to the Constitution of the United States. So it went to the Senate of the United States. Benjamin Harrison, fortunately for us at the time, was a lame duck president. His administration ended about a month and a half after the overthrow had occurred. So while the Treaty of Annexation was being considered by the Senate, he was no longer basically his term expired, and the new president came into power, and his name was Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland was actually a friend of the royal family from Hawaii because he had served as a president in a term before, and had played host to several members of the royal family of Hawaii. And so he smelled something fishy going on. And so he actually, about 4 days after he took office, he withdrew the Treaty of Annexation from the Senate, from being considered by the Senate. And he named an investigator, sent an investigator to Hawaii who spent 4 or 5 months sussing out what was going on in Hawaii. And then the investigator made a report back to the president, a 1,500-page report, basically condemning the United States for its actions, saying that the United States was wholly was responsible for the overthrow of a friendly nation and for the aggression against a friendly nation. And so President Cleveland went to Congress, and in a special address to Congress, he denounced the United States' actions in Hawaii and called for the restoration of the proper government, the Queen, and the constitutional government of the Hawaiian Kingdom, and that the United States had an obligation to restore the kingdom. Unfortunately, he turned the matter over to the Congress to proceed and to act on. And he turned his attention to some of the crises that were going on in the United States at the time. There were huge union riots going on, hundreds of people being killed, and there was also a great recession going on in the United States. So he turned his attention to those matters, trusting that the Congress would go ahead and fix things in Hawaii. Well, they never did. They did not act on it, and instead what they did was they waited for 4 years until a new president came into power. So meanwhile, the insurgents in Hawaii decided that it was unsafe to be called the provisional government for the Hawaiian Kingdom, so they declared the Hawaiian Kingdom to be now the Republic of Hawaii, and that they were in charge of the Republic of Hawaii. And then they sent letters out to the United States and others to back off from interfering with the internal affairs of a sovereign independent republic. And so that gave the Congress the excuse to not act. And so Congress did not act on what the president had requested of them. So 4 years later, the United States elects a different president, and it's the president whose name is William McKinley. And William McKinley was a avid subscriber to the Indian Wars. He's the one who ended the Indian Wars eventually. And then he also was a very strong proponent of manifest destiny. He believed that the United States had a calling from God to expand its influence around the world, and particularly into the West, into the Pacific, into Asia. And so he was a strong proponent for annexing the Hawaiian Islands. So the administration then created another treaty of annexation, which they signed with the Republic of Hawaii, and then again went before the U.S. Congress for ratification. The U.S. Congress, however, was besieged by the people of Hawaii. The people of Hawaii had taken up a petition in which 90% of the Hawaiian population signed a petition against annexation. So, and this was hand-delivered to Congress on the consideration of the ratification. And Congress had really no choice but to not pass this bill. There were some strong proponents for the ratification, but there were equally strong proponents against it. And so it came up for a vote twice, and both times it failed to get the votes necessary to ratify the Treaty of Annexation of Hawaii. And so that was shelved. But a few months later, the Spanish-American War breaks out. And the war is not only concerning the Spain's colonies in the Caribbean, but also in the Pacific, mainly the Philippines and Guam. And so the war ensued. By now, the U.S. had been using, under the Republic of Hawaii, had been using Pearl Harbor for its Navy, for the U.S. Navy. And so they dispatched their Navy to the Philippines and quickly dispatched of the Spanish forces there, or the Spanish fleet, in one battle, in the Battle of Manila in 1898. And so the Spanish were defeated in that Spanish-American War, and in the Treaty of Paris, all of the Spanish holdings were turned over to the United States, and including the Philippines. The Filipinos thought this was wonderful news, that now they would be liberated, because they had been fighting for years a war of liberation against Spain. But the United States announced, no, that now Spain was a colony of the United States, only didn't call it a colony. That was too harsh a word. They called it a territory of the United States. And so they announced that the Philippines was now territory of the United States. The Filipinos took up arms again and fought against the United States this time. Now, this was a very vicious war. At the end of the war, which lasted about 4 years, between 250,000 to 500,000 Filipinos were dead. And the Pearl Harbor and the rest of Honolulu was used as the staging area for the U.S. troops to come through to fight that war against the Filipinos. And so Hawaii was very useful to the United States as a major military base, and it hasn't stopped since then. So Hawaii has been seeing a steady buildup of militarism in our islands ever since that time. And so today, well, actually, there is a strong military, of course, background after that even. World War II. The United States becomes involved in World War II because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The attack against Pearl Harbor was not an attack against Hawaii. It was an attack against the U.S. military bases in Hawaii. And they were targeted specifically. Very few civilians died in that from attacks, It was targeted really at the military. Now, but of course, it dragged the United States into the Pacific, and Hawaii now became an even more enormous staging area for the United States military. And the entire battle in the Pacific came through Pearl Harbor and Hickam Air Force Base and all the other bases that were built in Hawaii. After World War II, the U.S. being victorious, everyone in Hawaii celebrated and was proud to be part of a territory of this great nation that defeated Nazism and the imperialistic Japanese Empire. And so Hawaiians became very enamored of being U.S. citizens or part of a U.S. territory. So there was very strong support in Hawaii for to be part of the United States. In 1946, the United Nations is formed, and they have two purposes in mind. One is to end all conflicts, particularly international conflicts, through peaceful means, to stop any wars. And then the second one was to decolonize the world, because at this time, over 75% of the world were colonized. So a list was created. The different colonial countries submitted the countries or territories or the colonies that they had to submit to be decolonized. So roughly 100 countries were placed on this list, countries that were colonies of Great Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and the United States. Of course, the United States called them territories. So the United States submitted 6 territories to be on the list of non-self-governing territories to be decolonized. And Hawaii, Alaska, Guam, Puerto Rico, and U.S. Virgin Islands, and American Samoa were all placed on that list. At the end of the decolonization process started taking place, and so the United States began to get worried about decolonization toward the end of the 1950s, because they basically decided that they did not want Hawaii and Alaska to be decolonized. So they cooked up a scheme to remove Hawaii and Alaska from the decolonization list. And the best way to do it was to go through a decolonization process. Only they didn't want to have a full decolonization process, so they rigged the referendum. What they did was they put only one question on the ballot. Well, first of all, they failed to educate anybody in Alaska or Hawaii about what this vote was about, except for statehood. They never mentioned that there was an option for independence or free association or any other option. All they put on the ballot was statehood for Alaska and Hawaii. So referenda were held in Alaska first in 1958 and in Hawaii. And in both cases, the voting public, which was again suspicious because only U.S. citizens could vote in this referendum of decolonization. And again, nobody was informed about other options. So, but the United States reported after this that both Hawaii and Alaska had overwhelmingly, over 90% of the voters voted to be annexed, to be a state of the United States, to be incorporated into the United States. And so that's what happened. The United Nations failed to examine what happened they failed to monitor the vote or even look at what the referendum consisted of. And they simply rubber stamped the United States report that Hawaii and Alaska had freely consented to become part of the United States and were thus now that the question of the political status was now settled. And so they rubber stamped through a resolution called 1469, They rubber stamped the United States report. And what that did was it consigned Hawaii and Alaska to the United States. From that point on, any attempt at raising the question of independence became one of having been politically settled through this consent by the Hawaiian people. So this is where we are right now. But so the big discussion going on in Hawaii is of course independence, to regain our independence by exposing what happened. But and then that most of that is because altruistically we want to be self-governing, we want to be self-determining. We don't want the United States to be making decisions for us from 6,000 miles away over the big ocean and over a whole continent. And we see the many mistakes or missteps that the United States had made toward Hawaii because they simply don't understand us, and they simply don't have our best interest at heart. So we are, one of the biggest things that we are talking about, the reasons why we need to be independent, is because of the military occupation of Hawaii. This vast military fortress that they have built in Hawaii maybe protects the United States, but it certainly does not protect the Hawaiians. And as we saw by the attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii is the prime target, one to be a first strike. The nation that can strike Hawaii first can win the war, or at least they need to actually remove Hawaii first. Only this time, it's not going to be conventional bombs falling on conventional targets. It's going to be nuclear warheads exploded a half a mile above the Hawaiian Islands. Any one of those warheads exploding can wipe out the entire island of Oahu. And this is what we face. Most of our people are unaware of this, even though we've had a lot of warning. In fact, 3 years ago now, in February, there was a false alarm of a missile attack. Basically, cell phones all over the Hawaiian Islands got a message saying, take cover, missiles attack, or missiles launched against Hawaii, or something like that. And basically, we would have 15 minutes to find shelter. It was because of, and it turned out to be a false alarm, praise God. But people panicked, of course. There was a great panic in Hawaii for 40 minutes until the missile alert was canceled. But during that time, we realized, and of course in the months after, we realized how ill-prepared, actually non-prepared, we are for a missile attack. And it's so obvious, and we basically said, what can we possibly do to avoid a missile attack? And the word was really nothing, and that the United States had done nothing to protect us, or even to warn us properly, or even to prepare us in any way. So we find that the United States was highly irresponsible, is I guess the softer word, but in how they thought about our safety. There was no safety measures for us. They said that they could shoot down any kind of approaching missile, but the exercise that occurred 2 months before that false alarm failed. And they basically said they have only a 50-50 chance of hitting an incoming missile. And today we are now facing missiles that the United States admits it cannot knock down, and that's the hypersonic missiles. And so we are completely defenseless, and yet the biggest target to any enemy of the United States, should they want to go to war against the United States. And not only the biggest target, but the most crucial and most important target that they could possibly do. So we are in an emergency situation in which we must remove the United States military from our shores and to safeguard our people so that we have a future. The other thing is that the only way to remove the United States from our shores is through an independent country. We must be able to become independent and demand the United States remove themselves from our shores. So that is my presentation right now.
Thank you, Minister Siu. And let's see, thank you to Hikaru for leaving us a nice message. Hai tai. Hai tai is the Okinawan word for hello. So thank you for that. Thank you to Wyside Soja for your many comments of support. Says those with pilau intentions or bad intentions will be held accountable. Yes, thank you to everyone for your nice comments. So now I will be giving a presentation about Okinawa or Luchu. I have a PowerPoint presentation here. 1 second. Let me just bring that up. Okay, can you see the presentation, the PowerPoint? Okay. Yes, I'm going to go through this pretty fast. Just quick disclaimer before we continue. This presentation includes images of and descriptions of warfare, graphic violence, assault, murder, and genocide. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we move forward, I want to quickly explain the names, the various names of Okinawa or Luchu or Ryukyu. There are a lot of different names because of the US and Japanese imperialism and colonialism, which is why we're having this problem with naming. So Luchu or Duchu is the most accurate spelling today in a modern native romanization. So I prefer to say Luchu. However, because this presentation will be having automatic Chinese subtitles added to it, in order to help the app better generate subtitles, I will be saying Ryukyu for most of this presentation. Ryukyu is a Japanese romanization of the native term Luchu. And because of Japanese colonialism, Ryukyu is better known around the world today. The name Okinawa is really not even native. It is a Japanese name that has been imposed onto Ryukyu since the late 19th century. So I am Robert Kajiwara. I'm native Luchuan, also known as Okinawan or Uchinanchu, founder and president of the Peace for Okinawa Coalition. I have degrees in both history and international relations. In December 2018, I started a petition to stop the illegal construction of the U.S. military base at Hinoko, Okinawa, receiving over 212,000 signatures. The Peace for Okinawa Coalition is a nonprofit organization founded and led by young Ryukyuans or Okinawans, dedicated to promoting Ryukyu culture, history, languages, rights, including the restoration of our independence. Headquartered in Okinawa City with an extension office in Honolulu, Hawaii. We're also trying to open an office in Geneva, Switzerland. Since 2019, we have been working at the United Nations, trying to raise support and awareness for our cause. So the Western media loves to claim that young Ryukyuans today or young Okinawans today don't care about the military base issues, and that this is really just an issue that the elderly care about. We argue that is not true. As you can see, our following here is predominantly skews young. So we do try to use social media heavily to promote our causes. We have over 100,000 followers on our various social media channels. We've appeared in over 95 news and media outlets in more than 20 countries. And I particularly like these. On the left here, you see me on the front cover of the Okinawa Times, along with the All Okinawa Coalition. So I'm very honored to be part of that. On the right, this article published in Gara. Gara is a Basque newspaper. The Basque are the indigenous peoples in Europe near Spain and France. So I thought it was interesting that a Basque news organization did this very lovely article about us. So thank you to them. And recently we were mentioned in Dr. Alfred de Zayas' latest book, The Human Rights Industry. So thank you very much to Dr. Zayas for including us. Here I am meeting with Governor of Okinawa Prefecture, Denny Tamaki. We met in both Okinawa and Hawaii. And my petition against the US military base in Okinawa was promoted and endorsed by a number of celebrities, including Dr. Brian May of the Rockman Queen. So thank you to Dr. May for his support. So a lot of people around the world don't know a whole lot about Ryukyu or Okinawa. A lot of people have this idea that Okinawa is very close to mainland Japan. This is not really true. It's kind of far away. It's a 3-hour plane ride between Tokyo and Naha. Naha is the largest city in Ryukyu. As you can see here, many major Chinese cities, as well as the cities of Pyongyang and Seoul and Manila, are all closer to Naha than Tokyo is to Naha. So mainland Japan is not that close to Ryukyu or Okinawa. And as you can see from this map, it's Ryukyu's special and important geopolitical strategic position that has led to Ryukyu's past success and prosperity. Ryukyu was historically a center of international trade and finance and cross-cultural exchange and diplomacy. But starting in the late 19th century and lasting up to the present day, Ryukyu has been taken over by Japanese and American imperialism. So we'll be talking about that today. There are roughly 160 islands in Ryukyu, currently 60 of which are inhabited. Around 1.4 million native Ryukyuans live in Ryukyu today, along with about 700,000 or so living overseas. There are around 80,000 Americans living in Ryukyu. According to an opinion poll, only around 15% of Okinawa Prefecture's respondents identified as solely Japanese. So one question we receive a lot is how many Japanese are living in Ryukyu today? And that's a difficult question to answer. We don't really know because the Japan government doesn't recognize Ryukyuans as a separate ethnic group. They consider Ryukyuans to simply be Japanese. So we don't have any hard data as to how many Japanese are living in Ryukyu today. But this poll conducted recently this year in 2023 said that only around 15% of Okinawa Prefecture's respondents identified as solely Japanese. So take that as you will. That could include some Ryukyuans who maybe they identify as Japanese, maybe they don't identify as Ryukyuan, or that could also include people who are ethnically Japanese and who currently live in Okinawa Prefecture. But according to various polls, in general, around 1/3 of the Ryukyuan population today identifies as both Ryukyuan and Japanese. And then 1/3 identifies as solely Ryukyuan and not Japanese. That would include myself, as well as most of our supporters, most of the members of our coalition. Ryukyu, we do have our own indigenous languages. UNESCO officially recognizes 6 Ryukyuan languages as indigenous, as well as endangered, very much endangered due to Japanese and American imperialism. The Ryukyuan languages are not mutually intelligible with Japanese. So the Japan government does not recognize any of the Ryukyuan languages. They consider all of them to be dialects of Japanese. They do not consider them to be indigenous or even separate languages. Keep in mind that the Japanese also said the same thing about the Korean language. That they said that Korean is not a separate language, it's just a dialect of Japanese. So that's the Japan government's official stance on the matter. So today, the lingua franca of Ryukyu is what's referred to as Okinawan Japanese. It is a sort of a pidgin dialect. It's a mix of both the Ryukyuan languages as well as Japanese. The number of native speakers of the Ryukyuan languages is dropping dramatically at a very alarming rate. The Ryukyuan languages are not allowed to be taught in schools. Japan historically banned them and actually punished those who spoke it with corporal punishment. Even to this day, people who speak the native languages face severe discrimination. We have our own unique culture in Ryukyu, including dance and music and dragon boat racing, which of course we inherited from China, the performing arts like theater, as well as the martial arts. So our very famous indigenous Ryukyuan martial arts in our language, it's known as Ti. But you folks know it better as karate. Karate is actually not Japanese at all, even though the Japanese appropriated it. Karate is not Japanese at all. It is 100% an indigenous Ryukyuan martial art. It does have strong Chinese influences, but it is not Japanese at all. We have our own cuisine, of course. It's a unique blend of indigenous Ryukyuan food, along with Chinese and Southeast Asian and Korean and some Japanese influences, also American. At one point, historically, taro was one of the major staple crops in Ryukyu. And historically, there were taro patches all across Ryukyu. However, when the Americans invaded, they destroyed a lot of the taro patches in order to build their military bases. So today in Ryukyu, unfortunately, there aren't a whole lot of taro patches remaining. There are still some, but not nearly as much as there used to be. Spirituality, we have our own spiritual beliefs. Spirituality plays a huge role in Ryukyuan society. The Japanese, after they invaded in 1879, they of course attempted to ban the spiritual practices as well. This ban did not really work. The customs are still alive and well today. However, they were successful at banning the nuru, also called noro. The Japanese pronounce it noro. Native pronunciation is nuru. These were female political, spiritual leaders. They did retain official positions in the Ryukyu kingdom. They helped lead the Ryukyu kingdom, and the Japanese did abolish this position. So. Since time immemorial, like I said, Ryukyu, we were an independent nation with our own unique culture, history, languages, and identity. Anthropologists have identified strong links between Ryukyuans and Austronesians from Taiwan to Mindanao in the Philippines, as well as the Ainu in the north in Japan. Historically, Ryukyu maintained a very strong and close relationship with China, dating back, informally anyway, all the way back to the Zhou dynasty. So, 3rd century Roman coins from the Roman Empire have been found in Ryukyu. So even more than 2,000 years ago, the Ryukyuans were still very active in trade. Ryukyu's first dynasty, the Tenson dynasty, it's prehistoric, but it ended in 1187 CE, replaced by the Shunten dynasty, which lasted until 1259. And then Ryukyu entered the Three Kingdoms period, where there were 3 competing factions, 3 competing ruling entities. This was a very important period because it was the start of formal trade relations with China, with the Ming dynasty. And then, of course, the Three Kingdoms period was replaced by the first Shou dynasty, which was the start of the Ryukyu Kingdom period. And then in the year 1470 was replaced by the second Shou dynasty, which is many consider to be the greatest dynasty in Ryukyu. So historically, China and Ryukyu maintained a special relationship known as the Zongfan. Zongfan is often translated into English as the tribute system, but I propose that it should actually be better termed the sovereign tribute system, because every nation involved maintained their own respective sovereignty. So when Westerners and even Japanese people today, they hear that term tribute system, they think, oh, one nation is oppressing another nation, just like the way Japan, Imperial Japan has invaded and oppressed many countries. America has done the same. Many European countries have done the same. So that's the idea that people have when they hear the word tribute system of oppression. That is not true of the China-Ryukyu relationship at all. It was a relationship between equals. So the way it worked is nations such as Ryukyu would offer tribute to China and recognize China as the greatest nation on earth. And in return, China would recognize Ryukyu as a sovereign state and bestow upon them many gifts and precious treasures. China, as the greater nation, always gave more to Ryukyu than what they received. And Ryukyuans were extremely happy with this arrangement and sought to pay tribute to China as often as possible. So it was actually Ryukyu who was the primary driving force in developing and growing this relationship with China, not the Chinese. The Chinese did not force anything onto Ryukyu. Under the Zongfan system, China was actually legally responsible to protect Ryukyu from foreign invasion. Unfortunately, they were not able to uphold that end of the bargain. Great Ryukyu. So China had so much respect for Ryukyu that it even gave Ryukyu an honorific title. So it was Da Lo Chou, meaning Great Ryukyu. This was the same honorific title that China gave to itself. So you can see China respected Ryukyu and saw Ryukyu as an equal. And this map here, this old map, you see China, Korea, and Ryukyu historically had such a close relationship that they were sort of considered like the big three of the region. Japan was, as you can see, was not even included on the map because Japan refused to participate in the China-centered tribute system. The West and Japan make a lot of very problematic false claims, claims that don't have any historical or factual basis. As you can see in this excerpt from the Encyclopedia Britannica, of all places, claiming that China forced themselves onto Ryukyu. This is Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, they're making this claim, and there's no basis in historical fact for this claim whatsoever. And yet, there it is in Britannica. So, and it's repeated by many Western and Japanese scholars and government officials, the mainstream media. They deliberately misconstrue the China-Ryukyu historical relationship in order, I guess, an attempt to justify Japanese and American oppression and imperialism against Ryukyu. It's just amazing how this works. Toshindoi, a very famous traditional Ryukyuan song. It literally means the Chinese ships are coming. This song is a celebratory song about Ryukyu's historical relationship with China. It's a very old traditional song, and it's still one of the most popular songs in Ryukyu today. It's played all the time at events and celebrations, the lyrics talk about people from all walks of life coming from every direction in order to participate in the celebrations of the Chinese ships coming to Ryukyu. So if as the Western and Japanese media implies that China was so bad historically to Ryukyu, then why are Ryukyuans singing and dancing a celebratory song about China even to this day? It's ironic because, as you see here on the lower bottom picture to the left, that's the former governor of the state of Hawaii, David Ige, who is partially of Okinawan descent. He's actually danced the traditional Okinawan dance kachashi to this song, Toshindoi. He's danced this song. I'm sure he has no idea what the meaning is. He has no idea it's a song about China. No idea. But he's danced it many times because it's so embedded in the culture. And then on the bottom right, you see Governor of Okinawa Prefecture, Denny Tamaki, who also dancing kachashi. He's danced, every Okinawan has danced to this song many, many times, not just him. Okay, so, and of course, the Japanese strongly criticize him every time he dances. But kachashi is such an integral dance. It's such an integral traditional dance for Okinawans. I mean, you have to do it. It's part of our identity. It's part of being Okinawan. And so the Japanese will never understand this. They never understand this. So they criticize poor Governor Denny Tamaki all the time. And the criticism is just completely unwarranted. Okay, the Satsuma invasion of 1609. The Japanese Satsuma clan in Kyushu, they invaded the Ryukyu kingdom in the year 1609 and forced Ryukyu to pay tribute to Japan. They executed any who resisted, including a very prominent member of the Ryukyu kingdom government. His name was Jana Uekata Tedo Rizan, who refused to bow to Japan and was executed for it. So this event gets really distorted by, well, especially mostly the Japanese, but sometimes also Americans. They're really trying to use this and twist it. They're trying to rewrite history in order to claim that this event means that Ryukyu is part of Japan and has been part of Japan since the year 1609. This is not historically true at all, and the historical facts don't support this argument. The truth is that 1609 should be considered the start of Japanese prejudice and oppression against Ryukyuans, but it was not the end of Ryukyu's sovereignty. Ryukyu continued to be internationally recognized as a sovereign, independent, and prosperous nation up until the year 1879 when Japan forcefully annexed it. So Ryukyu historically had a very robust trade network. It was Ryukyu was the center of major international trade in the region, And as I previously mentioned, it stretched all the way to the Roman Empire. I don't think any Ryukyuans actually visited Rome, as far as we know. Probably not. But the fact that it could stretch that far is pretty remarkable. So the Ryukyu kingdom, over the course of roughly 500 years, they sent at least 347 formal trade missions to China that we know of. 347. They sent more than 110 formal trade missions to the various different Southeast Asian polities. They sent 17 to Korea. Then they also sent 19 to Japan, but most of those were a result of they were forced to do it. As I previously mentioned, the Satsuma forced them to do it. Whereas the other trade missions to the other nations, Ryukyuans did that because they wanted to. They were eager to do it. Whereas Ryukyuan, a lot of the formal trade missions to Japan were done because they were forced to do so. Westerners were very impressed by Ryukyu society. Word of Ryukyu reached Napoleon Bonaparte, who was astonished that a nation could exist that was both wealthy and without war, without weapons. Ryukyu banned weapons. And so he was just shocked that Ryukyuans had no weapons, had no wars, but it was also wealthy. And so he was also shocked that Ryukyu had never heard of him and how great of a military leader he was. But again, Ryukyu was just not concerned with war. During the 1850s, American Commodore Matthew C. Perry visited Ryukyu. Matthew Perry was pretty racist towards a lot of Asians. He was pretty racist towards a lot of Pacific Islanders, and he had a lot of derogatory things to say about a lot of peoples. But even he was forced to admit that he had never seen cities as clean as those in Ryukyu. They were just shocked that they said that not even a speck of dust could be found in Ryukyuan cities. Okay, so the Japanese invasion in 1879, some Ryukyuans fled into exile in China, where they asked the Chinese government to help restore Ryukyu's independence. China did try to negotiate the settlement on Ryukyu's behalf, but the negotiations failed. Neither China nor Ryukyu had much of any negotiating leverage at the time. China was in decline and was facing threats both internally and externally from every side. Japan had modernized, they had industrialized, they had adopted a Western-style military, and their military was extremely strong. China had not yet done this. So the negotiations failed. And shortly after, China and Japan did go to war, and Ryukyuans hoped and prayed for a Chinese victory. Of course, it did not happen. And so Ryukyu fell under Japanese control. And but still, many Ryukyuans did live in China, continuing to hope and pray that China would one day become powerful enough to help restore Ryukyu's independence. What I term the Ryukyuan or Okinawan genocide. During the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, 1/3 of the indigenous Okinawan population was murdered in a span of just around 3 months, deliberately murdered, mostly by Japanese soldiers. They used them as human shields. They forced some to commit suicide. They forcefully conscripted others into the battle. They were doing this supposedly in order to try to save Japan, but actually they were doing it out of there was a lot of prejudice against them. Japanese soldiers murdered Okinawans who were caught speaking the native Okinawan language. They were afraid that Okinawans were pro-China and would join the war on the side of the Chinese and fight against Japan. So they deliberately targeted Ryukyuans or Okinawan independence leaders and civilians. And like I said, 1/3 of the population, many of whom were like the independence leaders, were killed during this time span of just 3 months. And it's taken decades for the Okinawan population to recover from this. So, let's see, I know we're getting close to time here, so I'm gonna go through this pretty quickly. So 1945 to the present, 1945, Ryukyu's independence should have been restored. It was not. Instead, the US military decided to keep Ryukyu for itself to use for military bases. Ryukyuans fiercely protested against direct US military rule. So in 1972, the United States gave Ryukyu to Japan, and since then, Ryukyu has been under joint occupation by both the United States and Japan. The Cairo Declaration, the Potsdam Declaration, and the Treaty of San Francisco, all legal documents that support Ryukyu independence that basically say Japanese rule over Ryukyu is illegal. Japan shall be expelled from all territories which she has taken by violence and greed. 1943, the Cairo Declaration. Japanese sovereignty shall be limited to the islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, and Shikoku, and such minor islands as we determine. 1945, the Potsdam Declaration. Some Japanese people might argue that, oh, well, Okinawa is not a major island, it's a minor island. Well, guess what? You have 80,000 American soldiers and their dependents living on Okinawa Island. You have 70% of Japan's military forces in the Ryukyu Islands. You have 1.4 million Ryukyuans still living in Ryukyu today. It's not a minor island. Okay, it's a very important geopolitical strategic island. As Americans and Japanese themselves say, they constantly talk about the strategic importance of Okinawa. So it's not a minor island; it's a very important island. The Treaty of San Francisco, 1951, Japan agreed with the proposal of placing the Ryukyu Islands under the trusteeship system of the United Nations. So that should have happened. Ryukyu's independence should have been restored. It was not. So our stance is that Ryukyu is still legally an independent country, but its de facto independence needs to be restored immediately. So Ryukyuans are suffering greatly under American and Japanese occupation. And so I think with that, I'll stop there, and I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Zayas.
Well, thank you very much, Robert Kajiwara. And thank you, Minister Sui. I've learned a lot from your lucid, at times entertaining, comprehensive, and realistic lectures. And let me not forget, since I do teach this period of history, if you send me the link to this program, I will transmit it to my students here in Geneva, and will also transmit it some professors, friends of mine in Boston and in Pittsburgh and in other universities in the United States. I always give to my students, for instance, the text of the famous or infamous apology resolution of Bill Clinton of 1993, because I think it's an eye-opener. I also send them the text of Barack Obama's 2009 apology resolution with regard to the American First Nations, the indigenous, the Sioux and the Cree and the Cherokees, et cetera, et cetera. The funny, or rather the very sad truth is that these resolutions were adopted, but no legal consequences follow therefrom. There's no issue of paying reparations to the victims, no issue of trying to restore sovereignty where that should be restored. Now, we have to do, and you're aware of that, you've already, especially Robert has pointed that out, there is an information war that relies on fake news, relies on fake history, fake law, relies on suppressing information. And when I say suppressing information, you are aware that very few Americans, and very few people here in Europe know anything about the history of the kingdom of Hawaii or the history of Luchu. And they may have heard the word Okinawa, but they associated it with 1945 and the war. That there are native Luchuans with their language and their history and their cuisine, that is off the map. And of course, if we're going to have any success in the United Nations, any success in revisiting and reversing Resolution 1469 of the General Assembly, if we're going to have any success in putting teeth into Resolution 48/7 of October 2021, we need the information. So as I said, my appeal to you, send me the link. I'll make sure that I share it with some of my colleague rapporteurs. I think that the rapporteur on the right to truth, justice, and reparation is someone who should act on this. There are many other rapporteurs whose mandates could significantly support your legitimate goals. Now, I mentioned Resolution 48/7, and I want to read from it because it has specific consequences or specific relevance to both the situation in Hawaii and the situation in the Luchu Islands. Resolution calls for member states and relevant United Nations bodies, agencies, and other stakeholders to take concrete steps to address the negative impact of the legacies of colonialism on the enjoyment of human rights. This is a direct appeal to Japan to correct the crimes of colonialism, of occupation and annexation of the Luchu Islands. This is an appeal to the United States to respect the sovereignty of the continuing kingdom of Hawaii, and to admit the fact that the United States committed fraud on the world in 1959 when it pushed through in the General Assembly Resolution 1469. For those listeners or viewers who are not familiar with it, that was the resolution that lifted the obligation of the United States to report to the General Assembly pursuant to Chapter 11 of the UN Charter, pursuant to Article 73, 74, 75, what they were doing to help the peoples of Alaska and Hawaii toward self-government, toward self-determination. Of course, self-determination referenda are not for the settlers. I mean, the Human Rights Committee, not the Human Rights Council, the Human Rights Committee, of which I used to be secretary, has adopted a number of resolutions concerning referenda, and obviously, like in the case Guillot against France, it was determined that not the settlers had a right to participate in self-determination referenda, but the natives. So had that been applied to Alaska and Hawaii in the referenda or the rigged referenda of 1958, obviously the result would have been entirely different. And if the options had been, do you want independence? Do you want a special territorial status? Do you want to become a state of the United States? The decision would have been totally different. Now, it's difficult, but not impossible, to revisit and reverse a resolution of the General Assembly. You may remember that in November 1975, a resolution was adopted by the General Assembly. Zionism is a form of racism, and that was adopted by a fairly large majority, over 2/3, 72 votes in favor, 35 votes against. This resolution was revisited and reversed in 1991, 16 years later, by Resolution 46/86 of 16 December 1991. That was at a time when there was a great deal of hope for a two-state solution for Palestine, that the state of Palestine would be recognized and that there would be self-determination for the Palestinians. Now, that has not occurred, but the resolution was in fact reversed. So the same as Resolution 3379 was reversed, certainly Resolution 1469 can be reversed. But coming back to the issues that we have been discussing, I already mentioned the information deficit. It is a major problem because from personal experience, my colleague rapporteurs are not historians. They know very little history. My acquaintances in the diplomatic corps, my acquaintances with ambassadors indicates that they cannot know everything. And certainly the history of Luchu and the history of Hawaii is not, on their menu. So you have to make an effort to disseminate this information. And this is a good medium. I find that webinars are very useful, especially if the webinars then can be placed in various sites in the internet, and if they can be used by professors in their classes. So I have every intention of using this presentation of today for my students, and not only in my current courses, but also in the following semester beginning in January 2024. Now, there are many issues related with this. Now, the theory and practice of the right of self-determination. This is something that applies to the Luchians and applies to the Hawaiians and applies to the Alaskans and many other groupings in the world. Now, theory and practice is United Nations Charter, Articles 1, 59, 55, I'm sorry. The entire chapter 11, chapter 12 are devoted to the issue of self-determination. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights begin with a reaffirmation of the right of self-determination of all peoples. Now, it's not just some peoples, like the peoples of Kosovo, but all peoples, meaning also the Luchuans, meaning also the Hawaiians. My report to the General Assembly in October 2014 was devoted entirely to the theory and practice of self-determination, and it goes in detail on this, shall we say, weighing or balancing of competing interests. On the one side, territorial integrity; on the other side, the right of self-determination of peoples. And I always cite paragraph 80 of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 2010 concerning Kosovo. Now, the bottom line was that the Declaration of Independence of Kosovo did not violate international law. But what underpins all of that, as you see in the questions raised in paragraph 80, is that this right of self-determination is actually precedential, is more important than the principle of territorial integrity. It says very clearly the principle of territorial integrity is only applicable externally. So it says, quote unquote, that this principle rules relations between states. So state A cannot invade state B and annex state B. So Israel cannot invade Syria and take the Golan Heights. That's clear annexation, illegal, violation of self-determination of the people of the Golan Heights. But you cannot use a principle of territorial integrity to say, I refuse to allow the people of Alaska to have self-determination. I mean, you cannot apply the principle of territorial integrity internally. You cannot apply it against your own people, which means you have to give your own people two options: internal or external self-determination. In the case of Hawaii, considering how Hawaii was a victim of an illegal, unconstitutional overthrow of the kingdom, obviously the only appropriate remedy for Hawaii would be the ending of the American illegal occupation and releasing Hawaii as a fully independent and sovereign state ruled by Hawaiians and not by the settlers. The same thing with Luchu. Luchu was the victim first of occupation and annexation by Japan, which, of course, in the 19th century, that was the heyday of imperialism. This was an act of imperial expansion by Japan. And the practice of international law in the 19th century allowed that. But that changed. Already, the League of Nations in the 1920s and any number of resolutions and rulings of the Security Council of the League of Nations go in favor of granting self-determination to peoples and protecting, of course, also the rights of minorities. And following the adoption of the United Nations Charter in 1945, we have a different world order. We have a world order that specifically recognizes the right of self-determination. So definitely, Luchuans had a right of self-determination, and they should have been able to reestablish their state. Hawaiians had that right. And of course, that right was frustrated by this fraudulent and rigged referendum held in 1958. Now, allow me to quote again from Resolution 48 bar 7, which I think is a landmark resolution, is a watershed. I think that we have to build on 48 bar 7, which reads in part, the General Assembly, or rather the Human Rights Council, urges states to refrain from the forced assimilation of persons belonging to minorities, including indigenous populations, and to work to ensure that education, curricula, and other materials do not stereotype minorities and indigenous populations on the basis of their ethnicity. The Human Rights Council reaffirms that persecution of members of any identifiable group, collective, or community on racial, national, ethnic, or other grounds, and that are universally recognized as impermissible under international law, and the crime of apartheid, constitute serious violations of human rights and in some cases qualify as crimes against humanity. As you know, the Convention on the Prohibition of the Crime of Apartheid, that convention specifically declares apartheid to be a crime against humanity. So essentially, we do have elements of apartheid in Alaska, in Hawaii, in Luchu. And I would like to see my colleague rapporteurs pick up the matter. I explained the mechanisms in my book, Building a Just World Order. The Building Just World Order appeared 2021, published by Clarity Press in Atlanta, Georgia. It was followed by a second in my human rights trilogy, Countering Mainstream Narratives, and then followed by the Human Rights Industry, published 3 months ago. Now, Building a Just World Order formulates 25 principles of international order. Of course, the first principle, and I think we all agree, is peace. The function of the United Nations is the maintenance of peace, the creation of those conditions for security, for stability. But I devote principle 10 to the right of self-determination as a conflict prevention strategy. It is indispensable to have a conflict prevention strategy. I see that I have a Skype call coming on in 10 minutes. So I announced that already before the beginning. So I just answered. They're indicating that they're waiting for me on Zoom, but I mean that will be in 11 minutes, and we're not there yet because I also not finished with the things that I wanted to say. Coming back to the book, Building a Just World Order, and the importance of the realization of self-determination. It is not the right of self-determination that causes war, but the unjust denial, therefore. And we have countless examples since 1945. Now, going back to the concept of peace, because I'm very much concerned, same as Minister Siu, about the provocations by NATO by the United States in the Pacific. It is clear that the United Nations Charter, Article 2, Paragraph 4, prohibits not only the use of force, but it also prohibits the threat of the use of force. And provoking someone constitutes a threat of the use of force. And the United States, for, shall we say, decades, in the Pacific, has been expanding further and making its military presence in Okinawa and elsewhere stronger, and sending out provocative, shall we say, naval demonstrations in the South China Sea and elsewhere, and creating a situation that could be considered by the Security Council under Article 39 of the UN Charter as a threat to the peace and security of mankind. And this is something that should be taken into account. Now, NATO has no raison d'etre. NATO is not a legitimate defense organization. NATO has, the moment the Warsaw Pact was disbanded, there was no more reason for NATO, because there was no defense. And what NATO has tried to do in these years after the collapse of the Soviet Union is to usurp the functions of the Security Council, to usurp functions of the United Nations in peacekeeping, and claims to be the world policeman. So no one wants that. The global majority in Latin America, in Africa, and Asia do not want the United States as a global policeman, and they feel threatened. I mean, the attempt of the United States to encircle Russia and the illegal expansion eastwards of NATO into Ukraine directly provoked the aggression by Russia in February 2022. So the pretended expansion of NATO in the Pacific, and the expansion of bases like Okinawa, or for that matter, Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, that poses a real danger to the whole region. Certainly poses a danger to India, and it poses a danger to Malaysia and Vietnam and China. So this is something to be taken into account as contrary to the letter and spirit of the United Nations Charter. So going back to both the situation in Luchu and in Hawaii, what we must do first and foremost is to get the information out, to make sure that the entire world is aware of the history of the illegality of the annexation of Hawaii, and of the illegality of the annexation of Luchu by Japan, and the violation of the right of self-determination of the Luchuans and of the Hawaiians. And we know that there is what I would like to call cognitive warfare. It's amazing how the mainstream media succeeds in changing our perception, so that those Luchuans who are fighting for self-determination are referred to as separatists, or worse, is when you accuse the Palestinians of being terrorists or whatever. So this cognitive warfare is intended to impose a negative image in our minds, so that when we think of the native Hawaiians, we don't think of them as a proud nation or a proud kingdom. We look down on them. So there's an element here of incitement to hatred. Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights specifically prohibits any incitement to hatred, violence, etc. And the kind of caricatures, the kind of fake history that has been disseminated in the schools in the United States with regard, for instance, to Alaska, Hawaii, but more generally with regard to the First Nations of the continent, that actually constitutes a violation of Article 20. But we can only advance if we succeed in gaining academia, getting the universities on our side, and say international law is on our side, and it is, shall we say, the imperial history writing of Washington that impedes any kind of progress and constitutes a threat to international peace and security. So allow me to stop here. I promise to use this program with my students if you send me the link. And I wish you that you convince other countries. I don't know whether you have reached out to universities in New Delhi and universities in South Africa, in Cape Town, etc., to pass the message so that the Africans realize that as they were colonized, as they suffered colonialism, so have you. The Africans were decolonized, the Indians were decolonized, you were not. And decolonization is not finished. That must be understood by everyone. And there is a blackout, you know it, in the mainstream media, but I think you can fight against it. Now, on that note, I leave you because I have to go on Skype right now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Aloha.
Aloha, Minister Siu. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to everyone watching at home or from wherever you happen to be watching. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this webinar, and we hope you will continue to follow us on social media for future webinars and videos and other materials that we will be presenting. Thank you all for your very kind comments. We received a lot of very nice comments of support. Real quick, someone by the username Voltaire Duterte said that, let's see, he wrote, or this person wrote, he or she wrote, you guys restored my faith in humanity, thank you. So we received a lot of other very nice comments of support from around the world, from China and from Hawaii and Luchu, Okinawa, and elsewhere. So thank you all for watching. Thank you for your support and your very kind comments. With that, I guess we will call it a day for now. Thank you, Y-Side Soldier. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Minister Siu, for joining us again.
Aloha. Thank you for having me, and I just really enjoyed this so much. We need to do it again soon.
Yes, we should do this again. We should do this more often. Let's plan on doing that. Okay, well, Thank you everyone again for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.